My daughter Annabelle has reached that period sometimes referred to as the terrible twos. If you are a parent or have been one, you know how challenging yet wonderful a time this is. Annabelle discovered speech and started walking. You run after a little wobbly person who can seemingly move across the ground at the speed of light. Behind a person who has an amazing vocabulary but uses the word no to the exclusion of all others. It was Saturday night, and I was bathing my daughter with the help of Mr. Bubble. It had been a long day. Weekends in our house were largely daddy time. Like daddy, I got up early with Annabelle. Swing, she said to start the day. That day included the park with its swings, small merry-go-round, and various slides. By bath time, I was almost out of energy. Kate, my wife of 5 years, used the day to clean the house. It seemed like a fair trade. Kate is an attorney at a large firm. She practices criminal law. She makes a six-figure income, and we have a cleaning service, but she's a finicky person who needs everything in its place. 2-year-olds are messy personalities. The division of labor in our house has definitely changed to reflect this fact. Kate was the mom holding the infant on her hip at all times, but when the baby started to break free, it was up to Dad to catch up. This evening, Kate was having a bachelorette party. There had been more than usual lately. I attributed it to the need to socialize with my girlfriends after being tied to the infant. I'm going to go wait for the car out front, Kate said, leaning over to kiss my cheek while I bathed Annabelle. Kate reached forward to kiss our daughter. In doing so, she pressed herself against me. I caught the scent of her perfume. It was such a small thing. She had a dozen perfumes. I never paid attention to them, but this one was different from the others. She had never used this scent before. I knew that because I recognized it immediately. My mother died when I was 5 years old. A car accident took her life on a cold winter night. When she kissed me goodbye, she was wearing Chanel No. 5 fragrance. It was a memory of a fragrance, a strong and unmistakable recognition. I didn't know Kate had that perfume, and I knew she had never used it before. I froze, and in the same instant I looked at her closely. She was wearing what I think women call a car coat. It was a light coat, more like a trench coat. It came to her knees but opened up above her waist, showing off the black dress underneath. The coat concealed what she was wearing, but not quite. I thought I recognized the dress, and of course, the 4-inch stiletto-heeled shoes she also wore. "Where are you going tonight?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "To Mario's," she replied. I knew that Mario's was played by Ben Walker. Ben was a bit of a local celebrity. He had ambitions as a concert pianist, but he played any gig he could get. I knew Ben. By the end of the evening, he was playing sad love songs. The women who crowded Mario's loved Ben and his playing. A good friend of mine never missed a night when Ben played at Mario's. Mario's was a mid-priced restaurant and bar with a small dance floor. Ben could play dreamy dance ballads, but he always ended with the slow love songs that women love to dance to. I love them myself when my girlfriend is in my arms. At Mario's, you could expect to see a group of women spending the evening. I trusted Kate. The explanation made sense. She was a beautiful woman, more attractive than one would expect from an average man like me. But she wasn't a movie star, and we'd been happily together for 5 years. Opposites in many ways, maybe, but we were right for each other. "I'll be home around 11 o'clock, she said. I busied myself with Annabelle and pushed all bad thoughts to the back of my mind. Half an hour later, Annabelle and I were sitting in front of the TV in the family room watching Cinderella. I don't know how much she was getting into the plot, but she was all ears. We watched it over and over until she fell asleep. I turned off the TV and just sat with my sleeping princess in my arms. I know I'm a happy person. I have more happiness than I deserve. Guys like me don't get a nice home, a beautiful wife, and a daughter like Annabelle. I was 17 when I went into the army to be all you can be. However, I was not what the army needed. I passed their tests well. I had a high school diploma and acceptable, if unspectacular, grades. Something just didn't add up. I had no discipline problems. Physically, I was well above average, and yet the Army didn't find a place for me. After my basic service, I was offered one meaningless position after another. I suppose I expected to be a soldier and carry a gun. Instead, the Army thought of a clerk. But in the office, I was hopeless. I couldn't formalize anything to save my life. They tried me in the mess hall, but I couldn't cook. I had enough for a day and a half. They sat me down and explained that I had no ability. I was good for nothing. So it was obvious that I would make a great military policeman. They were right. I did an excellent job. In fact, it was an impossible assignment. The Army correctly determined that I was one of those unique people who could handle the position. It required a complete lack of remorse and very high moral standards. You had to focus on always getting the result you wanted without caring how you got there. I got my first promotion in Iraq for killing a woman and her children. A car was trying to crash into a roadblock. The woman was driving, and I saw that there were children in the car. The fact that it was a woman driving was just the final clue. I knew it was wrong as soon as I saw her. I watched her get in line and waited. When the driver made her move, I made mine. 60 armor-piercing rounds did the trick, but it didn't compare to what her 10 pounds of TATP could do. My career has taken off, but I don't believe the commanding general approved of me. I know the general did not approve. He made that clear to me when he called me one day with a problem. "Listen, you waif, I know all about your shit, but I've got a problem here, so solve it," he said. He did have a problem. A young female enlisted man had been raped. The 3 rapists were officers, all West Point graduates. The good general made a huge scandal of himself. Situations like this can make people lose command. It's not really the commander's fault, but that doesn't seem to matter. A good commander knows to utilize the resources you have at your disposal. 3 mangled assholes from West Point later, along with a satisfied private, I was at the peak of my Army career. I called the general to report. "What are we going to call it?" he asked. We debated whether it was friendly fire or an accidental discharge. "You don't know?" "Well, my secretary is leaning toward it being an accidental discharge caused by combat stress." "Is the woman satisfied?" he asked. "Exceptionally," I said. "So what do I owe you?" the general inquired. "Well, I need an honorable discharge for my man." "Are you nuts? You want a junkie who shot 3 officers to have HD?" "Combat stress. I have a medical certificate in front of me," I said. I didn't mention that I had cleared this doctor of a DUI charge the week before. I also didn't say that my man was using heroin, not MJ. "Okay, send it over, but are you sure about the girl?" he asked. "The girl may be done with her tour. She has help. As they say, the Army is strong." This seemed to anger the general. "You may be useful, but you're still a son of a bitch," he said. "I never said otherwise, but of course feel free to call again." "My door is always open," I said as he hung up. I worked in security for 10 years before I left that job. Then I used my veterans benefits and got a 2-year certificate in public safety. I went to work for the railroad as a security supervisor. One night we apprehended some guys trying to unload plasma TVs from container cars in the rail yard. I was called to testify at their trial. That's how I met Kate. She was an assistant district attorney at the time. 2 years later, we were married. And a few years later, we became parents. I tucked Annabelle into bed and then went to our bedroom. It was a modest 3-bedroom house that we had bought when we were first married. Money was a problem for us in those early years. Kate had a bunch of student loans to pay off. I started looking for perfume, and it ended up on the dresser. There were a dozen bottles of perfume there, but this one was new. The closet in the bedroom is big, but even in it, Kate's entire closet barely fit. It was well organized, and I started looking through it. I knew which black dress I wanted. She never threw out things that were still wearable. A certain black dress she hadn't worn since we'd been dating. It was very chic, expensive, and short. It was her black dress that matched the heeled shoes she wore today. The dress was not in her closet. She wasn't wearing earrings when she was in the bathroom, but she always wore her diamond studs with this dress. I checked the jewelry box. There were no studs. My wife supposedly went out with the girls, but dressed for seduction. It took me less than 20 minutes to find her. I never left the house. I had a regular cell phone provided by my employer, but she had an iPhone. I didn't want to spend the money to replace the phone if I lost it, so I installed the Find My iPhone program on her phone. Now I opened my laptop and quickly found her phone. She wasn't at Mario's, but at a completely different restaurant. Vincenti's is a very expensive restaurant, too rich for our budget. Maybe my wife could afford it, but not me. After doing a little searching on Street Views, I saw the front door of Vincenti's on my computer. It was not yet 8 o'clock in the evening, but I am a patient man. Just after 9 p.m., my wife showed up. I recognized the man immediately. Judge Leonard Simple, a recently appointed federal judge. I had met him a few years ago at a 4th of July picnic of the County Republican Party when he was still the district attorney. He was a good dozen years older than me, and he was 15 on Kate. But here she was, big as life, kissing him as they left the restaurant. The first time I met him, I immediately disliked Simple. He was nothing more than a run-of-the-mill politician. Women might find him handsome, even handsome, but he had devious eyes and a commanding demeanor. In addition, he gave off an aura that to another man said, arrogant and weak. I didn't like the way he looked at my wife, and I told her so. Kate laughed it off. Kate didn't get home by 11 p.m. It was 12:30 when I saw her get out of his Mercedes from the third bedroom window. We live in an old 1970s neighborhood with smaller houses built around a cul-de-sac. They parked so she could come in the back door. I was expecting this. My wife is a cautious and meticulous woman. She expected me to be asleep, but prepared for the other option as well. What she didn't expect was for her clueless husband to figure her out. And I was lying in bed pretending to be asleep when she entered our bedroom. She immediately made her way to the jewelry box. She noticed the diamond studs first, and then walked to the closet. Enlarging the closet was the only remodeling we'd done to the house. She must have changed her clothes in the closet because she came out of there in an old terry cloth robe. Then walked out of the bedroom and headed down the hall to the bathroom. I heard the shower turn on. As I left the bedroom, I went to the bathroom door and turned the knob, but my always prudent wife had locked the door. I didn't want to catch her washing off the evidence that night, so I went back to bed. When she eventually came in, she carefully lifted the covers and climbed into bed, snuggled up against me, and I heard her say in a low voice, "I love you." There would be payback, but not tonight. Next chapter. FBI Special Agent Thomas McPierce was a seasoned veteran. Divorced from his wife of 18 years, and with 2 children, he was nearing retirement. His seniority allowed him a quiet position, but burdened him with a junior agent partner, Sheila Marks. Together, they crossed the police line, showing their identification. Sheila smiled, sensing the respectful look the FBI credentials elicited from her. "Don't smile, Agent. After all, the man is dead," McPierce said. Sheila assumed her combat look. She was a tall, athletically built woman. She didn't draw attention to herself, but she was smart and had military experience. She had passed Quantico with flying colors and received many accolades. But as a field agent? McPierce felt that with her size and military dressing, she would be better utilized in an extraction team. She looked appropriate with her short haircut. After determining who was in charge, the agents headed toward the tall 40-year-old woman. Connie Baker was the lieutenant of detectives. Her team was scattered around the neighborhood, but she was in charge of the coroner's staff's efforts to retrieve the body. "I've been expecting you," she said when she saw the agents approaching. "How are you doing, Connie?" said Tom. "Good, and you?" "Never better. This is my new partner, Sheila Marks," Tom said, and then with a wave of his hand added, "Lieutenant Connie Baker." "Nice to meet you," Sheila said. "You too," Connie said to Sheila before turning to McPierce. "Sorry to hear about your marriage." She wasn't sorry, but that was the sort of thing that was supposed to be said. Personally, Connie thought the former Mrs. McPierce was a horse's ass. Leaving a man like Tom was the last thing Connie would ever do. "So what do we have here?" asked Tom. "One dead federal judge," said Connie. "Looks like a robbery." But 2 hours later, the but was still there. The murder of a sitting judge was an unconventional case, so Tom carefully examined the crime scene with Connie. She, too, was a good and reliable investigator. The FBI had no reason to interfere with her investigation in any way, so Tom steered his investigation in a different direction. Judge Simple was the district attorney, and as a lawyer had a reputation as a stern guardian of law and order. Perhaps someone was hungry for payback, or the crime could be connected to some unfinished business. Tom agreed to share the effort with Connie. He and Sheila would look into options unrelated to the robbery. The FBI labs would handle the evidence, and Connie and the local authorities would check out the robbery version. It's been 10 days, but there's been no significant progress. Forensics came back positive. Leonard Simple was shot from about 5 feet away. He was literally shot right between the eyes. There was only one bullet, and it was fired from a Walter PK.038. This gun was silent, easily concealed, and very powerful, the weapon of a professional. But a professional killer had to shoot from the back or side. The judge was killed walking out his front door around 8 o'clock in the evening, and the porch lights should have given the killer a view of Simple. Whoever shot Simple wanted the victim to see him. He wanted that one to know who was shooting, Tom thought. So it must be some kind of revenge, but to whom and for what? None of the obvious suspects fit the crime. There were hardened criminals, but their motives and availability didn't fit. The phone rang, Connie calling. "We found some stolen items through the fence," she said. A suspect has been apprehended, a meth dealer named Alex Sloms. Next chapter. "I'm not saying anything without a lawyer," Sloms began. "That's fine," Connie replied. "But this is Special Agent McPierce of the FBI, and he has a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card for you." Sloms tensed at the mention of the FBI, but relaxed when Connie's words reached him. "It doesn't hurt to listen," Sloms said. Tom McPierce explained what they were looking for and what they were willing to give for it. "So you have something to tell me?" concluded McPierce. "Yes. I don't have a name, but I can describe the guy who handed me the goods." A few hours later, the district attorney and the lawyer from Legal Aid sealed the deal, and Alex Sloms worked with the sketch artist. The drawing had good detail and was completely useless. Connie and Tom realized this as soon as they saw it. Another hour of questioning Sloms and they were convinced. "It's something else," Tom said. "You could say that," Connie replied, looking at the picture of an apparent drug addict with years of experience. It was exactly what one would expect, and therefore clearly a false trail. "It doesn't add up. Walter 38 has a street value of what? $1,000? said Tom. "More than that. The gun is clearly worth more than the stuff taken from the victim." "No junkie would go to the suburbs to commit a crime like this when he already had the means to fix it in his hands," said Connie. "No, it was done by someone who had a motive, who wanted to throw us off and knew how to do it," Tom suggested. They finally agreed to show the photo, but to look more closely at the victim and who might have wanted her dead. "I think it was a personal matter," Tom McPierce said. Next chapter. Kate was worried. It wasn't just that the FBI had asked for an interview. Kate had more or less expected it to happen sooner or later. Unless they found the perpetrator very quickly, the authorities would try to question her because she was Len Simple's lover. The affair was long-standing, and after the birth of their daughter, it became quite intense. Kate loved her husband, Bill. He was a wonderful man and a great father, but not that interesting. He was a good, stable, dependable type. Len was handsome, wealthy, and influential. But Len wasn't the marrying kind, and certainly not the kind of man you want to spend your life with or have children with. Besides, Len was vain and self-centered. Kate could tolerate him for a few days at a time, but not all the time, and certainly not as a spouse. Len was fine with that. All he needed from a woman was entertainment and a few hours of company once or twice a week. Len was no Don Juan. He liked women, but he preferred a steady girlfriend with whom he felt comfortable. He and Kate were a close friends with benefits couple. They had passion, but not the passion needed for marriage. Len's death hit Kate hard. She found it difficult to hide her grief from her husband. The funeral was brutal. Everyone kept offering her their condolences. Lena's older sister Charlotte was the only family he had left. Officially, Charlotte was the chief mourner, but she and everyone who worked with Len and Kate knew about the relationship between the prominent lawyer and the judge. Kate contemplated leaving her husband at home, but couldn't think of a single valid reason why he shouldn't attend the funeral with her. Most people thought Bill had at least condoned her relationship with Len. Only her closest friends knew the truth. She had completely concealed from her caring and loving husband her long-standing romance with a powerful district attorney and then judge, but she saw her deception more as Bill's defense. She was shielding him from the harsh fact that he could never compete with a man as powerful as Leonard Simple, a man who took whatever he wanted. If it had been up to Len, poor Bill would have been in a triangular situation, but Kate insisted on one condition. Bill was not to know anything. The funeral strained at this ruse as people continued to express their sympathy for her. Even someone as gullible as Bill could see that there was more than just a professional relationship between them. For a week after the funeral, there was nothing between the couple, though otherwise Bill was as warm and loving as ever. Just 3 days before, her husband had taken her to bed. Such behavior was rather odd for her spouse. Kate hoped that even if Bill did suspect her, he had decided to put everything he and Len had as a couple behind them. But did what he didn't know matter? The FBI interrogation was disturbing, and she felt she had to restrain their actions. It was important to keep the investigation away from Bill. She needed to preserve Bill's ignorance, or at least his ability to live in denial. She needed to give him the peace of mind he deserved and earned as her good and faithful husband. Next chapter. Special Agent McPeers was impressed. The law offices of Stanford, Price, Clark, and Morgan were large, luxurious, and obviously expensive. A request to speak to Mrs. Ford went unanswered. "How about Catherine Morgan?" said Sheila, Agent Marks. "Oh, Mrs. Morgan, I'll tell her you're here," said the secretary. Tom McPeers realized that his inexperienced partner had done her homework and was already jumping to conclusions. The information they had indicated a long-standing relationship between the high-profile attorney and the victim, but they had only come here to conduct a preliminary interview. "Button up your moral outrage and keep it on your face," Tom whispered to Sheila. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Morgan? Really? Her husband doesn't even approve of using her name?" she whispered back. Kate Morgan came out to greet them. She was a tall woman with shoulder-length black hair, dressed in an expensive charcoal gray pinstripe business suit that accentuated her slender but curvaceous figure. It would not be unreasonable to call this woman beautiful. She led them into a large, bright, and elegantly furnished office. As they settled into cushioned chairs around a coffee table, Kate offered drinks and began to talk while they declined coffee and tea. "I assume you're here about Len's murder," Kate said. "Yes, we heard you were a close friend of Judge Simple," Tom replied. Kate smiled quietly and said, "Let's be honest. I was his mistress, and for quite a long time, just over 8 years." Tom was surprised at the woman's candor and her apparent lack of embarrassment, but it certainly made it easier. "Thank you for your candor," Tom said. "I really want to help in any way I can, and honesty is the least I can do." "I hope you realize that I would appreciate your discretion," she said. "Of course, but hasn't your relationship been public knowledge?" "Oh, I don't think so. In a long-term relationship, many coworkers and friends guess or suspect it, but really? I don't think anyone can say for sure." "Not even your husband?" asked Sheila, sarcasm evident in her words. Kate's smile grew even deeper, and she allowed herself to be condescending toward the large, unattractive agent. "My husband is a wonderful family man, but not very sophisticated. He wouldn't have understood my relationship with Len. I'm sure he didn't even realize until recently that Len was more than just a former colleague to me, Kate said, turning to McPherson, continuing. I'd ask you to leave him out of this. He doesn't know anything useful, and I want to preserve his peace of mind. What could have happened lately to disturb him? Asked Tom. A funeral, I suppose. Many people have expressed condolences to me, realizing how close Len and I were. My husband is gullible, but not stupid. That's a strange way to describe a man who rose to commissioner from the ranks of the military police and now heads security at a railroad station guarding tens of millions worth of equipment and goods, Sheila commented, taking the bat between her teeth. As Tom had feared, the inexperienced Sheila was jumping to conclusions without evidence. He reached out a restraining hand and squeezed her forearm lightly. Forgive my colleague, Tom said, but under the circumstances, her question is legitimate. Kate hesitated. My husband is a very capable man, and yes, he has a responsible job. But you misjudge his character. He is a family man, a devoted father, and a loving husband. I confess I deeply regret taking advantage of his trust in me. But you must understand. My relationship with Len Simple long predates my marriage. He was a strong man. He was hard to resist, and he was not inclined to part with what he thought was rightfully his. However, our relationship was no deeper than a sincere friendship. He became my mentor. I owe much of my current success to his help and guidance, Kate said. But you didn't tell your husband, and you believe he didn't know? Asked Tom. Yes, I withheld information from my husband about my relationship with Len. Bill is the man I love. He is my partner in an exceptional marriage. What he found out about Len and that relationship would not have been good for anyone. It would have hurt Bill for no reason. Since my relationship with Len has lasted and will continue for as long as Len wants it to, Bill's telling me about Len and me would have served no purpose. I see. Could you tell us where you were? The night Len died, and probably at the very moment of his death, I was at the Valentine restaurant waiting for Len. I'm sure the restaurant staff can confirm that to you. We were regulars there. As she said this, Kate's eyes began to water from the memory. I'm sorry, That's okay, we understand. Circumstances like this are never easy. But do you know where your husband was? Asked Tom. Kate began wiping her eyes with her handkerchief. Yes, he was at work. He has a 4 to midnight shift, but he rarely leaves before 2 in the morning. The railroad yard is crowded at night. But please, when you check, be careful. It wouldn't be fair to involve my husband. I understand and thank you again for your candor, Tom said. As the agents began to rise, Kate suddenly remembered something. Do you happen to know what happened to Len's watch? Asked Kate. Tom turned around. The watch? Yes, it was a special gift I gave him about 2 weeks before he died. It was an anniversary of sorts. We had been together for 8 years. The watch was rose gold and very expensive. It was not among the things his sister found after the funeral. I assumed he had worn it that evening. No, we had no idea. The police found his ring and a gold cross, but I don't think they knew about the watch, Tom said. Sister Lena said the watch wasn't in his personal belongings, and as far as I know, he started wearing them, she said. Can you describe them? Well, it's a Rolex, rose gold, and inscribed Love, Catherine, and Annabelle. I'll let the homicide detectives know it might have been stolen, Tom said. Next chapter. Tom arranged to meet Connie at the Valentine's restaurant. He put on his best suit, suspecting that the meeting, set for 8 o'clock that evening, was not strictly business. Glad you could make it, Connie said. She was seated at a modestly placed table. This was definitely a couples' restaurant. One could see why Judge Simple had chosen it for his liaison with Kate Morgan, aka Mrs. William Ford. Connie was dressed appropriately for an upscale restaurant. She was wearing a black dress with a deep V neckline showing off her ample cleavage. The dress was shorter than women approaching 40 usually wore, but not disgraceful. She'd done her hair and painted her nails. She looked good. Too damn good. Tom reminded himself that she was at least a dozen years younger than him and was his co-worker. Stop thinking and sit down, said Connie. Tom smiled. Now you're a mind reader. Men are so obvious about some things and so dumb in general, she said. Sorry, it's just... That's okay. We're adults. We're not married, and this is the best restaurant in town, she said. Okay, he said as the waitress approached. This is Tara, Connie said. Tell Agent McPierce what you told me. The waitress Tara was obviously a little nervous. Well, it's just that they were an odd couple. You didn't realize it at first. He was a large, handsome man and looked quite well off. I wasn't surprised when I heard people refer to him as a judge. She was stylish, very attractive, and much younger. Exactly the kind of woman a man like that should have. Except they didn't look like a couple that had any affection for each other. You'd think she was a paid escort, but she clearly wasn't, and she was actually some kind of professional, probably a lawyer, Tara said, as she finished her assessment of Judge Simple and Mrs. Morgan. When you say they weren't affectionate, what do you mean? Asked Tom. Just everybody. They never came in together. She waited on him, not the other way around. She never touched him first, and when he touched her, it was like possessiveness. When they left, he always hugged her as if she belonged to him. It seemed to make her nervous. She wore an engagement ring with a small diamond wedding band. He wore a ring, but it wasn't an engagement ring. She was obviously married, but not to him. Tom wondered, did you notice if he wore a watch? Tara smiled, warming to the topic. Yes, after she gave it to him. Right at this table, she handed him the box. It was the only time I've ever seen them really kiss. He was very pleased with her gift and the inscription. The inscription? Asked Connie. Yes, I remember, because it was rather odd. Something like, from Catherine and Annabelle, your loving ladies. I remember wondering who Annabelle was. I knew he called her Kate, or sometimes Kitten. When did she give him the watch? Asked Tom. Tara paused to think. Must have been over 3 weeks ago. I remember it was a Friday. She was dressed to the hilt, but much more lecherous than usual. The dress looked painted on and was as short and low as one could dare wear to avoid being a streetwalker. She went in to wait for him, covering herself with her coat, but when he came in, the coat was taken off her. After deserting him, he took out a watch box and they opened a bottle of the best champagne. 2 weeks later, she waited for him, and he still didn't show up. It wasn't the first time she had to wait for him, but it was the only time she waited all night, and he never showed up. The next day, I saw on the news that he had been killed. I felt a little ashamed for telling the waiter that the bastard set her up. Thanks, Connie said. Tara looked down at them. Sure, anytime. Do you want to order anything? Yeah, we're staying for dinner, Tom said, giving Connie a look that said, You're not going to say no to me. Next chapter. The meeting with the FBI upset Kate more than she could have imagined. The female agent looked at her like she was some kind of insect. Kate felt a considerable amount of guilt and shame, but she also thought of herself as a good person trapped by unfortunate circumstances. She was a young attorney, barely out of law school, when she had fallen under the radar of the powerful and charismatic district attorney, Leonard Simple. Women didn't turn down men like Len. Kate was in an inferior position. Len was the big boss. He was a highly respected attorney, and she was at the bottom of the ladder. She was flattered by his advances and was physically drawn to his manhood. She wasn't a virgin, but she wasn't a whore either. Though she'd tried to stay out of his bed when Len Simple had chosen her, she'd had no choice but to comply. At least, that's how it seemed to her. Kate hadn't expected their relationship to last long, but for 3 years now, they'd had an ongoing affair. It was never public, but most people in the office knew about it. She was given assignments to choose from and was treated well, but her relationship with her boss held her back. Bill Ford came along 2 years after her affair with Simple began. He satisfied her need for a steady boyfriend. He was part cover, part companion. Sleeping with her boss 2 or 3 times a week still accounted for many lonely nights. Hiding the affair from prying eyes meant she needed the occasional official date. Both she and Len had, as it turned out, other romantic interests. Their affair was a secret one, Neither of them considered it a permanent relationship. Len wasn't permanent, and Kate didn't want to become his wife. A mistress suited her just fine. She needed more from her husband than a man like Len could give. "We had an accident," she said. They lay in bed together between coitus. "What are you talking about?" asked Len. "I'm pregnant," she said. Len remained silent. His eyes said it was her problem to solve, not his. "I'm going to marry Bill. We haven't slept together yet, but we definitely will. He won't know she's not his." "So you want to deal with that?" he asked. "I'm a Catholic. A sinner, yes, but a murderer, no." Len shrugged and took it. They didn't talk about it again. Bill was on the prowl. After that, she simply showed him the pregnancy test. He was more than happy to get married quickly. He didn't have a family. Her parents were disappointed that there wasn't a lavish wedding. Kate had been married for 3 months when the worst day of her life began. She was at work when she felt wetness between her legs. An hour later at the hospital, the doctor talked about how she had something spontaneous. Kate knew only one thing: her baby was dead. Bill had been great. He hugged her and told her how much he loved her, planned the funeral for the baby that would never be. He was strong for her and insisted they would have a big family. Somehow his faith kept her going. It was the worst time of her life, and that's when she fell in love with her wonderful husband. Kate's affair with Len slowed down, but it didn't stop. It seemed that what happened with Len had nothing to do with her marriage to Bill. She realized that she loved Bill in a way she could never love Len, and for all the right reasons. Bill was a good man and a loving husband. Len was rich and powerful, but a completely worthless man. Len got her a job at the best criminal defense firm in the state. There she excelled, and 2 years later Annabelle came along. She was Bill's daughter in every way, except perhaps one. Kate refused to verify paternity. There was no reason for her to know, and besides, it would be disloyal to Bill. He would always be the father of her children, no matter what. Len saw things differently. He never saw another picture of Annabelle, but insisted that it was his child. He intensified the relationship and wanted Bill to know about it. Kate refused that demand. Bill, to whom she was married, must never find out. He was the man who cared about their child, the best father Annabelle could have had. The thought that Bill could be so frivolously accused by Marks's agent was extremely unpleasant. Kate realized that if her lover was killed, suspicion would fall on her husband. But no one who knew her Bill could believe him capable of such a thing. Kate's duty now lay with Bill. At all costs, she must protect him from the terrible truth. Why should he, an innocent man, suffer for her sins? Kate picked up the phone and made the call she hoped would protect her secret. Next chapter. Special Agent Tom McPhees had spent 4 nights of the previous week in Lieutenant Connie Baker's bed. A few times they'd discussed the case they'd been working on together, but mostly they had fun. It had been great. Tom realized that since the divorce he had been busy all the time. He needed a new woman. Connie was exactly the kind of woman he needed, relaxed and not demanding. He knew she was hoping their affair would lead somewhere, but hell, so was he. "I'm just a little more cautious," he thought. But once burned, twice shy. Tom McPace's first marriage had broken up when his wife of 18 years left him for a younger man. He came home one day and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of red wine and a serious expression on her face. Her "we need to talk" was followed by a simple explanation that she was unhappy, and then she handed him a packet of divorce papers. After 18 years of marriage, she wanted all their assets, half of his pension, and most of his salary for child support. They had a boy and a girl, both still in school. He was a man who usually kept his cool, but here he lost control. They were bitterly divorced. To his ex-wife's surprise, the children preferred their father to their new boyfriend. Tom was now receiving child support, and her share of the estate ended up being less than 30%. Tom was lucky when his case was assigned to a very sympathetic female judge. As he arrived at the office on Tuesday, he thought about Connie, but he had Agent Marks to deal with. For once, Sheila did what she was told to do. While looking into Bill Ford's alibi, she was being discreet. Tom had been warned to finish the case quickly and not to spread the word about the judge's foul play. Upstairs, death by robbery would have been welcome. Obviously, some strings were pulled. No one wanted a scandal, except Sheila. "My intuition tells me this fellow did it, sir," she said. "It wasn't Sir, Tom, Mac, or Agent McPeers, but not Sir. You're no longer in the military, Agent Marks," he said a little more sharply than he intended. "I'm sorry, C-Mac. It just fits so well. Former military policeman worked his way up from private to captain. Has a good rating on the range. He's certainly capable, and has the best motive. And it wouldn't hurt to have the scandal that broke out ruin Catherine Ford Morgan," thought Tom. Sheila immediately disliked the Morgan woman. Tom could not but approve of her. McPierce should have been critical of Kate Morgan, but he had long ago learned to separate personal feelings from work. Besides, he understood the situation she was in. A powerful man had entered her life. Sure, she'd made some bad decisions, but let those without sin criticize. He also realized that a woman like Sheila was not a very feminine woman behind whose back the office nags were discussing that she was a transsexual. She came with a stump on her shoulder. It didn't help that physically she was more than fit for half the male agents in the office out of shape. She also embarrassed all the female agents with both her physical ability and her devotion to duty. Tom had caught her on several occasions talking on her personal cell phone. Apparently she had a love interest, and he figured she had probably left the military to follow him or her. The office staff mostly assumed it was her, but Marks kept that information to herself. "I don't mean to sound harsh, but we need more than a good motive and your gut. So figure out how to nail Mr. Ford or exonerate him," Tom said. 3 days later, Sheila was smiling when a large box of papers dropped on her desk. "What's this?" asked Tom. "Surveillance tapes at the railroad station. They are recorded every 7 days," she said. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," said Tom. "Because they use this outdated system. The images aren't erased. The prints are still there. The lab techs say they can reconstruct the night any way we want." Tom smiled and looked into the box. "Good work, Agent. But how many cartridges do you have in there?" 27 cartridges with 12 hours of compressed tape on each," Sheila replied. "Well, good luck to you and the lab technicians. I, on the other hand, have a hot date," he laughed. He was actually dating Connie again. Things were getting serious and he was half excited and half scared. He arrived at Connie's with the local newspaper and the intention of picking out a movie to watch together. He was met at the door by Connie. "I thought we could go to a movie," he stammered. "Sorry, babe. I need my man and I need him now," she said, and dragged him into the bedroom. And that's how their evening went. Next chapter. Mac found a tired Sheila Marks in the office. "It doesn't look like you had a good weekend," he said. "Yeah, try going through 27 surveillance tapes sometime and then see how you look," she replied. Mac laughed. "I don't sympathize with you. You brought this on yourself." In response, Sheila only hummed. "So what?" he asked. "Well, so what? He's on tape. Considering he's in charge of a bunch of scumbags, if he hadn't been there, it wouldn't have worked out. If those railroad guards had walked slower, they would have moved backwards." Mac suppressed a smile. "So the husband didn't do it?" Sheila hummed in response. "Could have paid someone." "Yep." "Which undermines the premise that the judge knew the attacker, which is why we were looking for the husband in the first place." "So it's a botched robbery. I find that hard to believe," she said. Mac didn't say anything back. The only lead they had was the jewelry sale. It was wrong, but you went where the evidence led you. Next chapter. Agent Marks jumped out of the car in front of the Eldorado Hotel, located in a poor part of town. Agent McPherson was slower. After all, there was no hurry. Connie waited by the elevator while Sheila climbed the stairs. "Seriously, Mac, what drives your partner?" Connie asked. Oh, the usual, I guess, he replied, shrugging his shoulders. Sheila had looked almost depressed ever since she'd reviewed the tapes from the railroad station, as if packing them up to return to the railroad had been her personal failure. Do you think she's a lesbian? Maybe, but if she is, she doesn't play where she works. But honestly, I have no idea. I've never seen her even glance at a man or a woman. A bit unnatural, don't you think? She may be different, and yet she has no tolerance for women like Mrs. Ford, he said. Well, you mustn't discount jealousy. When you're a woman like Sheila Marks, it's hard to sympathize with a beauty like Kate Ford. Watching women like Mrs. Ford juggle men is hard on any woman, Connie said. And yet a man I know seems to have a thing for that promiscuous lady. I have good reasons. First, I'm older, and second, I'm a career woman, and I know how easy it is to get into trouble in the workplace. Oh, that sounds like experience. You bet, most women, regardless of their looks, have suffered unwanted attention from a man in a higher position. In Morgan's case, she became the object of a very powerful man's attention at a very vulnerable moment in her professional life. Once she was in his hands, she probably saw no way out. They continued to talk as they walked up the stairs, avoiding the foul odor and risk of the elevator. I feel sorry for Sheila. She seems to be a loner, Connie said. Well, she doesn't have many friends. I heard she has a few army buddies. It's claimed she listens to music with someone, but she doesn't talk about anyone. She keeps to herself, Max said. The room they entered smelled of death. The coroner was bagging a corpse. Sheila watched the body being removed, her face as impassive as ever. The forensics team was doing their job, but what Connie had called for was lying on a small table that had obviously been used for two purposes: eating and drug preparation. Two evidence bags, one containing an automatic Walther 38 and the other a gold Rolex watch. Mac picked up the bag containing the watch. He could make out the inscription inside. Love, Kate, and Annabelle, your ladies. Any guesses as to the cause of death? Asked Mac to Connie. Yeah, looks like natural causes. He's an Afghanistan veteran, Private Salvatore Marsh, came back with a serious drug problem. Somewhere he contracted HIV. He's been in and out of the hospital for the last few months. He was supposed to be in hospice now, but he's been discharged. I think he was self-medicating. We think either the disease or the drugs got to him, Connie said. Are you going to shut him down? Asked Mac. I don't see the point. He fits the evidence. I don't know why he decided to rob the judge, but he had a gun and stolen items. If anyone else was involved, we'll never know. So the bitch got off scot-free, Sheila said. Neither of them saw her come up behind them. Put an eye on it, Mac said, turning to Sheila Marks. I think there's been enough pain here, Connie said. It's time to let people move on. Sheila only shrugged her shoulders. Mac sensed that she was somehow sadder today. Whatever this woman carried inside her was stronger than usual. Next chapter. Mario's was pretty crowded for a Tuesday night, but then it was ladies' night. Ben Walker started playing love songs. With the slow music, most of the patrons took to the dance floor. The exception was a tall woman with short dark hair in the far corner of the bar. If you got close enough, you could see tears in the corners of her eyes. I hope they're not for me, Sheila, I said, taking a seat next to her at the bar. She turned away and replied, No. I didn't press the question, but waited for her, as befitted a good friend. I'm not crying, just thinking about Sal. I thought he was cleansed, she said. Yeah, but not right away, I said. Well, I guess you're safe now, she said. Did the tapes work? Like a charm. No one even looked. I guess some people can beat the system. Oh, the system will win eventually, but not this time. The bartender brought the drinks I'd ordered, and I handed Sheila hers. Come on, I said. Let's drink to Salvatore Marsh, who maimed 3 officers and killed 1 judge. Not bad for a man whose hands shook too much to hold a gun. She smiled weakly, picked up my glass, and took a sip of her vodka martini. Here's to a good comrade, she said. Then, as if by the way, she added, You won't hurt her. I didn't need to ask who I was rooting for. She's Annabelle's mother. Besides, she makes a fortune. I think I'm entitled to it. The last sentence brought the first real smile. You know, when you're not around, I miss you, she said, turning to me and brushing away her tears. I might even love you if things were different. What? You mean you don't love me? I said, pulling her to me. You know what I mean, she said with her shy chuckle. Seriously, as I've said many times before, love is not a physical act. It's all the things we do for each other, I said, as I took a sip of her glass and drank my first martini of the evening. We drank until Ben lost his temper, and then I'd walk her home and put her to bed. In some ways, she was the strongest woman I'd ever known. She was capable of putting a full clip from an M4 carbine into the legs of those who wronged her. All three of them she put in wheelchairs for life. So they'd never do it again, she used to say. But when you knew her well, you realized there was a little hurt little girl underneath. She was my little girl, my friend and my comrade. We would always be together. I ordered 2 fresh drinks and, when they arrived, raised my glass to us. I said, Army strong. Army strong, she replied. Shall we dance? I asked. When she nodded, I led my lady to the dance floor. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.